In my video about Captain America Civil War, I mentioned that while some black characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, like James Rhodes and Sam Wilson, are fully developed in the movies that they first appear in, they are often overlooked or minimized in the Avengers movies. One thing I did not dive into, however, is that these black men are never given romances. For this video, I'll be examining cinematic films and television shows released on ABC. I don't have the time or money to access MCU shows on Freeform or Hulu, and Netflix's shows, though far from perfect, are better in this regard. With the exception of T'Challa, Killmonger, and W'Kabi in Black Panther, no black man in the MCU films is ever in a romantic situation. War Machine, Falcon, Heimdall, Mordo, all of them are major characters in the films that they appear in, but they never have romantic interests, or even scenes where they flirt, reference significant others, or mention going on dates. The closest we get to a major black character referencing romance is Nick Fury clearly lying to Steve that his wife kicked him out in The Winter Soldier, which is far from any actual romance. Black men are held to a different standard, both in real life and in media, than white men are when it comes to romance. A black man being romantic can be read by bigoted audiences as inappropriate, even though they'd accept a white man doing the same actions, or even worse. Like I said previously, to many white fans, a black man consensually hugging a woman is seen as assault, while a white man restraining and mentally violating a woman is seen as sweet. But I don't think that the creators of the Marvel movies are on the same level of intentional bigotry that plagues fanfiction sites, but rather on a more casual run along the racism ladder. After all, these are great characters. They have motivations and empathy and are good role models. They're just never shown pursuing romantic love. And before you come in to say, but Moth, they're minor characters. We can't expect all of the minor characters to have love interests. There's only ever the white male superhero and his almost always white female love interest. Allow me to preempt that remark. Happy Hogan, Fandral, Volstagg, Odin, Frigga, Phil Coulson, Darcy, Bucky Barnes, Aldrich Killian, Trevor Slattery, Drax, Yondu, Scarlet Witch, Vision, Helen Cho, Scourge, Helmut Zemo, Aunt May, on and on and on. All of these characters, none of whom are more important than Sam and Rhodey, and some of whom are less important, are shown at the very least flirting, but many have significant others that are seen on screen. Romance is a common, important part of many people's lives, but never for a black man in the MCU, again, outside of Black Panther. And I also want to preempt an argument that there are women of color who have love interests in the MCU. I know this, and I appreciate it. I'm not saying that women of color should not have romances. I'm saying that, in the MCU, black men don't. And these characters have love interests in the comics, but giving them those romances on screen would be unexpected for a major film company. For Falcon, we'd either have Layla Taylor, Sam's longtime girlfriend, or Jane Foster, Sam's recent girlfriend. Layla is a dark-skinned African-American civil rights activist, with natural hair and is both brave and bold in her advocacy for black rights. She's far from the safe option that Marvel defaults to, and while she's a fantastic character, I don't exactly trust the Russo brothers to do her justice. Not to mention that when adapting black women from comics, there is a noticeable, long-standing tradition to have them be portrayed by light-skinned actresses, and I'd rather not see one of Stan Lee's most progressive characters whitewashed and watered down to be palatable for majority white audiences. Jane Foster is a problem for the executives on the other side of the spectrum. While Layla Taylor is a dark-skinned black woman unestablished outside of the comics, Jane Foster is a light-skinned white woman already in the MCU. There's a double standard where white men really don't want to portray black men with white women. Most producers of popular or financially successful media in the States are white men. White men in relationships with black women is more often accepted in pop culture. Yes, as I have established, there are many people who would rather see white men be miserable than be happy with a black woman, but in terms of popularity, interracial relationships are more likely to be tolerated by white men if the man is white. This is a combination of racism and misogyny. If white men choose to date black women, that's their choice, but many white men see their white female relatives as their property, and are more often opposed to black men marrying them than white men. It's obviously racist, and you can find this sentiment online very easily. I'm not accusing Feige et al. Of this level of racism, but I can't help but notice that, outside of the new Star Wars movies, Disney hasn't had a black man and white woman relationship in their theatrical movies. What about Zeke and Sharpay in High School Musical 3? Okay, you're right. Yeah, I guess I forgot that one. On a side note, this trend does go in the other direction. Men of color will sometimes not have a problem dating outside of their race, but will see some women of color dating white men as betrayal. For example, see how in Donald Glover's Atlanta, black women are implied to only marry white men for money, and white women are with black men for true love. There's always a double standard for women, but as save Thor Ragnarok and Black Panther, the MCU is directed exclusively by white guys and, I guess, now white women. I'm focusing on the standard that's being held against black men. Obviously, I am not saying that white men shouldn't date black women. Any media that portrays black women as receiving love is a step in the right direction, as so much media seems opposed to that. What I am saying is that the MCU seems opposed to letting black men date white women, and it goes beyond Falcon. I wouldn't make such a broad claim if I couldn't back it up. James Rhodes, in the comics, has three main love interests. Glenda Sandoval, a dark-skinned black Latina woman who would run against the same colorism as Layla, and also has a dark history probably not suitable for children. Ray Lacoste, a white woman of French descent, who would actually fit in really well as a likable side character without taking too much screen time. But it's as precedented as any other romance we see in the MCU, with the exception of Rhodey being black, and we thus don't see it. And recently he dated Carol Danvers, who I'll get to in a bit. Nick Fury is also not given love interests, despite the comic characters he's based on having several. Pamela Hawley, Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, Nia Johnson, America Delexis, Monica Chang. A diverse group of women, but we haven't seen any of them. And don't try to tell me, oh, he's supposed to be a shadowy figure, because Coulson was too, and he's had several love interests. Which brings me to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the other ABC shows. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. does do better than most of the movies. Mac is actually in a long-term romantic relationship with Yo-Yo, and it's great. A perfect example of a black role model being respectful and loving towards a woman, and it's also an example of an interracial relationship that doesn't have a white person. Really solid relationship, and it's one of the best parts of the show. Then there's also Andrew Garner, who does admittedly have a compelling relationship with Melinda May. The problem arises when he turns evil and transforms into a mostly mindless monster, clearing the way for May to end up with Coulson. And then he dies. Kind of twice. Finally, there's Antoine Triplett, the charming agent that had a cute flirtatious relationship with Simmons and died horribly to save the white passing main character. This isn't even touching how, of the main black characters, the only one to have a happy ending has the lightest skin. ABC also produced Marvel's Agent Carter, the most white feminist show on my tentative scale of live-action superhero television series. The only character of color on the show, Jason Wilkes, has a romance with the lead character, but is ultimately tossed aside so that she can end up with her white boyfriend. This white character, Daniel Souza, was created for the show and has no comic book counterpart. Peggy Carter, in the comics, moves on from Steve Rogers very quickly and falls in love with Gabe Jones, one of the Howling Commandos. Gabe Jones actually predated T'Challa by 3 years, and to my knowledge was both Lee and Kirby's first black character, and part of Marvel's first interracial couple in 1973, which was only 7 years after Peggy's introduction, and 6 years after Loving v. Virginia. Gabe and Peggy beat out Iron Fist and Misty Knight by 3 years as well, and they were a fantastic couple. They both loved each other and worked as a battle duo, and they commiserated over the discrimination that they faced from the white supremacists in Hydra, unable to fathom their success. Their love also served as a plot point with Red Skull hating Jones for having relations with a white woman. In the early 70s, Marvel both had an interracial loving romance and explicitly said that those who are opposed to it are Nazis. Massive respect for Steve Englehart on that one. But the showrunners for Agent Carter don't get my respect. They don't use Gabe Jones, and no, it's not because they didn't want movie characters. Howard Stark and Dum Dum Dugan both show up. It's also not because they didn't want to show Peggy in romantic relationship, because, as I said, she ends up with Sousa. There's no logical reason for her love interest to be Sousa rather than Jones. If they couldn't get Derek Luke, they could have recast, like they've done with several MCU characters. But no, they went out of their way to avoid pairing a white woman with a black man, only to later tease that option as a foil to their endgame all-white relationship. But like I said, I've saved Captain Marvel for last. Carol and Rhodey are pretty much two peas in a pod, kind-hearted pilots that leave the Air Force to help people rather than hurt them. As such, their romance seemed like a no-brainer. Though it didn't last too long in the comics, before the movie came out, people were wondering whether or not Carol would have a romance with young Rhodey. Well, some were. Others were adamant that she should not, under any circumstances, have a relationship with Rhodey, because we really need a female hero who doesn't have a love interest. Okay, so it wasn't Black Widow or Scarlet Witch that didn't need a love interest when they were paired with white men. But the possibility of a white woman being in love with a black man that's her equal isn't empowering enough. This is not the first time I've seen this argument used against black characters finding love. People will swear that there was no chemistry between Thor and Valkyrie because Valkyrie wasn't objectified. White feminists didn't want Supergirl to be tied down by a man when it was Jimmy Olsen, but were happy when it was Mon-El. Likewise, if there's a chance that Carol would be with a black man, she better not have a love interest. Now is the time to subvert romantic expectations. Never when it's a white man, never when it's a male main character, but when a white woman would be with a black man. Look, here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that women need love interests. I'm not saying that the creators of the MCU are intentionally being anti-black. I'm saying that, over and over again, black men in the MCU are used either as loveless, asexual black friends or obstacles towards relationships with white men. And though the intention may not be racist, the results represent a double standard, and no amount of justification or whataboutism can change that.